I'm delighted to be here and thank John for inviting me to take part in the Human Ecology Forum series. I wish I could get to these gatherings. I read about them in the weekly COA e-blast and feel frustrated by being in Ellsworth. I think to myself, if I hadn't left COA in 2001. I also think you ought to record these programs and offer them as podcasts, and I was delighted to meet Max when I came in and sign a release form for that, so it's great. Anyway, I'd like to start with a small group of earlier poems and then spend the remaining time on more recent work. I've never been prolific, half a dozen poems a year, and not all of them keepers. Most of my writing involves art, but when a poem comes along, I try to seize the verse. These first few ones owe something to my life at COA, where I was steeped in the concept of human ecology. The term proved challenging sometimes in handling the PR for the college. The students study what? The reporters would ask. My human ecology elevator speech wasn't so great, but then there aren't many elevators in this part of Maine. This first poem arose out of the first Ellsworth gold rush many years ago. Some of you may remember. I had been living in downtown Soamesville, and one day all of these nets appeared by the library. As far as its connection to COA, I think the college made me more aware of the chains in nature, which you will hear referenced. When I think of Ellsworth, I think of the self, of the eel in me, the glass eels in all of us. And I think of Presley at Graceland, his hips wriggling into the hearts women open to him, fragile, like the fyke nets that lead tiny elvers into ice boxes marked Japan, where raw fish slips down eager throats, salty stuff from the Maine Gulf. $40 a pound for eels that otherwise would end up in Soames Pond's muddy bottom. Food for something bigger, because there's a chain at the top of which we stand, skin shiny with sweat, the effort of the harvest, making our Elver living, our lives tied to muslin nets, drying in the spring sun along the banks by the library, where books are free for the taking, like these transparencies called elvers, a variant of eelfare, the passage of young eels up a river, or a stream as silver as this one, filling pockets on the tides, in the moonlight, slipping through my fingers in the bad dream I sometimes have of eels, of Elvis, and of selfish, selfish me. Since moving to Soamesville 25 years ago, I have drawn subject matter for a number of poems from local material. And at one point, I read a news story about the death of a scallop diver in Soames Sound. And I was struck by many of the details in the newspaper and wove them into the piece. I was working at COA at the time, and I remember some of the whale researchers, and in particular Peter Stevick, talking about how it takes a special intelligence to match up the markings on whales. He was showing how, you collect these photographs from around the world and how some people are really good at putting them together. And so that idea kind of worked its way into this poem, a special intelligence. And it's dedicated to Louis E. Green, 41, died in Soames Sound, February 6, 1998. A special intelligence, the scallop diver. Marine biologists look so long at the surface of the sea for signs they are able, after years of sweeping eyes over whitecaps, to distinguish royal of dolphin from wake of wave, to pick out fin in sullen ocean, whale exhalation on an overcast day at a great distance. This visual acuity represents a special intelligence to make out slightest disturbance, differentiate shades of gray. The same goes for those who spend their lives underwater, who discern scorpionfish camouflaged amid coral, or indentation in the sand that is flounder, skate, or soul. And the veteran diver who harvests those shells whose insides drive diners crazy possess that sharp eyesight that spies fan-shaped mollusks on the Sound's murky bottom. But chill water numbed his head, and air from the sixth tank ran thin, and ice made an extra curtain to block dull winter light. And in panic, the diving man inflated the suit and felt his torso expand, as if it were the Incredible Hulk, and he soared like Superman over tall buildings to bump against the terrible canopy that held him under like a mean cousin, drowning him yards from his boat. And Sternman, who waited a while before getting scared and radioing the Coast Guard, and the coxswain trained to find people lost at sea, to pick out bodies in the surf, to peer through thickest fog, spotted the body among broken ice, and had the awful honor to haul in the heavy human catch, survived by 4 children and a mother. Oh, diver lost beneath the ice, darkness overcomes us all at end of day. This next poem is dedicated to Miller Doherty, who I think might be the longest serving staff person on this campus. I assume he's still out there doing his thing. It's called Desire Lines. It was inspired by something that Millard said while the college was working with Getty's Dem Shack, if you remember that, on a new campus plan. And I wanted to note that this poem originally appeared in Edge of Eden, which was COA's literary journal. I don't know if that's still going.
Yes.
All right, cool, okay. So, Desire Lines. Desire lines. They are the paths worn across lawns, unofficial thoroughfares, the people's choice. They are the lyrics in a song or poem. Shall I compare thee to a summer's night? Or, I want to be your lover, baby. I want to be your man. They are invisible midway points in the bed that we cross over in our sleep, seeking heat. They are different from sites of opportunity and constraint. They are where we want to go on our walks to the other side of campus, in our arts, in our half-waking state. My brother David and I inherited our Uncle Bill Keembush's house on Great Cranberry in 1980, and that place has been a wonderful source of inspiration over the years. I wanted to read one short poem. Started one day when I was standing in the backyard of our house looking out at this little side building. Young pine. The white pine that happened to grow needles to clapboard at the back of the shed looks like it is hiding from the cops or a gang, or is simply playing hide and seek. A 9-year-old girl, say, with gentle bows hugging the corner of the outbuilding, trembling in a breeze, hoping no one notices her until she can reach a size where the house owner won't consider her spindly enough to be cut down. Lithe, small, hidden, the young pine is beautiful. Someone should embrace her as she grows toward the roofline, save her from the saw. And then this next poem, the last of the earlier work, was helped along a great deal by Terry Plunkett, who was the editor of a journal called Kennebec that came out of the University of Maine at Augusta, where he taught and worked. And actually, the annual Terry Plunkett Poetry Festival, which honors his memory, was held at UMaw last week. This is Red Nightshirt, and he was a wonderful editor because I'd send him work, and he'd look it over, and then occasionally he'd write back, and he'd say, Carl, I really want to publish this thing, but I have no idea what you're talking about here. Could you look at this stanza? Could you try to fix this? And I go, oh yeah, I see what you mean. It doesn't really make much sense. So this is one that he did take and helped shape. Red Nightshirt. A flawless field appears, prime for planting, where seeds sown one day provide a harvest the next. where weather always accommodates and your kids eat all their vegetables. Or an occasion for renewal and repose presents itself, melancholy diverted like a muddy stream through a bright new aluminum culvert lowered by crane. Then there's the dream of sorting things out, in which every bead from a broken necklace rolls out from under the radiator, pops up from a crack in the floor into your deft fingers. Meeting up with your best old buddy, you will save him from a knifing or simply communicate without words. And if you happen to be sporting a red nightshirt, as I am, when at last you touch base with the sleepy depths, you'll come into a small fortune of rare books with unheard of literary associations. Or better still, be implicated in a warm conspiracy to help the poor, comfort your daughter with wondrous words, love your wife beyond restraint. And reading that poem reminds me of that red nightshirt. I wish I still had that thing. I did some great dreaming in it. And here's where I shift to poems written since this collection, Ocean Drinker, came out in 2006. And I start with a poem inspired by something that Charles Simic said in one of his interviews a long while ago. I studied with Simic when I was at Columbia and always loved his work. And I've written a couple of poems now that have been provoked by something he has said. And this is the last rites from the title of my reading, rites being spelled W-R-I-T-E-S. And the quote from Simic is, "I tinker with most of my poems even after publication. I expect to be revising in my coffin as it is being lowered into the ground." And I do want to mention one thing that I mentioned, a bone orchard in New Hampshire. Simic is a long time taught at UNH. He's an emeritus professor there, but that's where he taught for most of his life. At the wake for the ex-US poet laureate at the Hotel Fin du Monde, someone swore he heard a scratching sound in the casket. And later, as we wedged the box into a rocky corner of a New Hampshire bone orchard, one of the pallbearers, a pallid poet with acute hearing, caught the sibilant sound of the words being crossed out, kissing substituted for praying, perhaps, or lover for beloved. The gentle rub of a razor, the whisper of a breath to remove residue from the paper, and the click of the miner's lamp Simic insisted wearing on his head in lieu of the standard issue laurel wreath. I've been working at the Maine Community Foundation now for actually 13 years, and I've come to appreciate the Ellsworth, the crossroads of down East Maine. And I've been prompted to write about a few of the enterprises up there, the Midas Shop, the Redemption Center down on Water Street, Jasper's Restaurant. I am particularly fond of Gold Star Dry Cleaners, and in part because of something that happened there once. I give a lot of slide talks, now less so because I'm moving over to PowerPoint, but I have this habit of when I'm doing a slide talk that at the last minute I'm apt to take out a couple of slides and put them in my pocket and then forget about them. So one day I go back to Gold Star to pick up my laundry, pick up my shirts, and the woman is gathering the stuff, and then she comes to the counter and she kind of slides this slide across the counter, and she goes, "I think this is yours." And so I pick it up, and it's a nude on the rocks with great things of rope tied around her. And she just didn't say a word. Like, she didn't let on, like, who is this guy? So I've always appreciated that. They're, keeping it close at hand.
So Carl, was that slide yours?
What's that?
Was that
It was
slide
that.
yours?
It was my slide. It's an
Okay.
artist named Elizabeth Knox, and she'd done a series of nudes, female nudes, with large pieces of heavy rope. So, dry cleaners. Suits and such winging by, dreamy, numbers punched in while you wait for shirts, light starch on hangers. Get your jollies watching parade of skirts swishing past, patch of gray ultra suede, tuxedo pants, favorite tattered overcoat, Marine uniform, clothes of men and women you've never met, citizens of Greater Ellsworth, who hand in pink slips for something pressed, clean as a whisper, a blouse or bell-bottoms, even see-through curtains to frame the view from your bedroom, where shirts and skirts are strewn and later gathered for the cleaners. The latest installment of my Ellsworth, Maine sequence, as I'm calling it, was inspired actually by reading John Anderson's remarkable book, Deep Things Out of Darkness, A History of Natural History. I don't know if you all have read this book, but I am just so much enjoying it. I've been reading it, I told John, for the last 2 years, pretty much just sort of in short installments, kind of, doing a little bit of Tycho de Bray and then a little bit of Linnaeus. But anyway, I had just read the section in the book about Alexander von Humboldt, the 19th century naturalist, when I happened to go to the car wash in Ellsworth, and this is what transpired. Ellsworth car wash for John Anderson. After paying $7 for just a wash, suddenly you're with Humboldt sailing across the stormy Caribbean, spray from all sides obscuring your vision, huge strips of kelp slopping against the bow. Then just as suddenly the voyage ends, coming through the other side of the squall, blasts of hot air blowing you dry, you regain your sea legs. A new land lies before you, Rite Aid and the road to Bar Harbor. A couple of summers ago, I was invited to spend a week on Great Spruce Head Island as part of a week-long retreat at the former home of the painter Fairfield Porter. Porter's niece, Anina Porter Fuller, hosts Art Week there, inviting artists and writers to do their thing for a week. It's remarkable what you can get done in 6 days. The poet Sylvester Paulet, late of Ellsworth, ended up writing 60 what are called ketchiks, which are tiny little haiku-like impressions. They're shorter than haikus. And while he was on Great Spruce Head, and I just wanted to read a couple of them because they're really wonderful. They're very short. So this is the first one. Great Spruce Head, 6 miles offshore. Buddha goes too. And then number 11. Come on, mosquitoes, leave me some blood. 14. Goiter tree, you needed iodine. 29. Blue bait bag, you come with me, suet for the chickadees. And number 42. I saw 3 islands in a bay, Edna, St. Vincent, and Paulet. And then 43. What's a perfect sand dollar worth in euros? And then finally, the last one. Don't grieve, strive with diligence. All compounded things decay. Buddha's last words. So I arrive and I'm walking up towards what the Porter family calls the big house, and I see a small green snake in the path. So I'm sort of anxious to get going, so I just sort of latch on the image. And so the first poem I wrote out there, and really turned out to be the best of the group, came from that sighting. And I did want to mention a couple of things from this poem. I mentioned St. Croix in it. I had spent some time in St. Croix and had seen these creatures around the resort, and they turned out to be mongoose. And they brought mongoose into St. Croix to kill the snakes, and now there are no snakes on that island. And then the other reference here that some of you might not know is Rikki Tikki Tavi, which is the Kipling story of a famous mongoose who could kill snakes. Small green grass snake, Great Spruce Head Island, Maine. Slithers through the grass, although slithers doesn't do its movements justice. Maybe glide or ripple or shapeshift. So delicate, thin, moving up the path ahead of our footsteps. God or someone saw the shape in the grass and called it green grass snake, an easy ID compared to, say, Bactrian camel or nudibranch or ocelot, all part of paradise, which makes me think of the poor snakes of St. Croix, enjoying rain of a virgin island, looking up one day to find a mongoose in their path, which proceeded to rip them skin from skin, brought in to clean up Eden, a ricky-ticky-tavi nightmare for the serpent crew, an injustice played out by man playing God. The ghosts of snakes rattle the dry corn shakes, while here, a slim slider of light green hue that wouldn't know a mongoose from a molehill heads off to the left in search of edibles in the northern kingdom of great spruce, where no one holds dominion over nothing. The next poem was inspired by a favorite television show of my youth, The Addams Family. I don't know how many of you know that show, but it was sort of an alternative lifestyle, shall we say. And I just thought it was the greatest sort of kind of family values that I could think of. So this is called Woo. When Gomez Adams kissed his way up Morticia's arm after she spoke something French, I made a mental note. Broad smile and sharp pecks from wrist to neck. That was the way to make love to a woman. Later moves ran a bland gamut. Slow dancing, locking eyes, a bit of begging. Never came easy pitching woo, but whatever woo was, I wanted to be the ace hurdling curveballs that had brunettes falling into my arms where they'd sigh, mon amour, signal to my lips to start their ascent up the smooth arm, like Gomez with his pale bride, his smile flashing as he imagined the rack in the next room where the loving happened, in a house, sadly, not at all like mine. And another poem provoked by something that Charles Simic said, and this one is dedicated to my mother, Juliana Little, the maker of the manicotti of the title. My mother and manicotti, and the quote from Simic is, "Great meals, which I sometimes remember in greater detail than people I've loved." Whose aunt's house was it where the lentil soup made me stammer? And what about those Swedish meatballs at what's-her-face's place? Dill in the sauce haunts me to this day, but not the lover across the table. Gun to head, I could describe a rack of lamb that inspired sighs, yet the names of the couple who prepared it escape me. But the manicotti consumed in a pot-induced haze, each forkful offering fulfillment, that was the art of my mother, who may have wondered at the appetite of her long-haired son beaming before his plate. Ricotta, etc., stuffed into pasta shells, tomato sauce covering. Oh, wonder and aroma. And the woman who bore it from the oven, nearing the end of a bitter marriage, her smile tight, her hair dulling, the pot-holdered hands clawing the Pyrex. She is not forgotten, no matter how many meals come and go. While my father watches figure skaters in the next room, clapping his hands. What matters here and now, I swear, is the mother, not the manicotti, waiting to burn my welcoming mouth. And then a poem in which I go out of my way to thank some of the individuals who picked me up during my hitchhiking days. To a few of the people who picked up me and my friends hitchhiking in the 1960s. To the oral surgeon somewhere in Connecticut who told me his art was sculpting children's faces. I'm grateful you didn't reach to pinch my cheek, but left me at an exit outside Hartford. To the car full of yokels exiting a racetrack in northern Iowa that stopped for 3 young men and didn't leave us tied up in an underground bunker, we appreciated the ride. To the hippies in the VW bus who shared a joint on the way to a band concert in upstate New York and who didn't have a meeting with Charlie Manson, much obliged for the high. And to the guy who drove Pete and me from Iowa City to Frisco, detoured through Estes Park without a thought of mailing our ears to our parents, hope the West Coast was everything you dreamed. Those are all actually based on real rides. I did get a ride all the way from Iowa City to Frisco. It was pretty cool. This next one arose after learning of the death of the great pianist Van Cliburn last February, and I'm pleased to say it's coming out in the new issue of Words and Images, which comes out of the University of Southern Maine. This is If Van Cliburn Hadn't Died Yesterday. If Van Cliburn hadn't died yesterday, the classical station wouldn't have played Debussy's Reverie this morning, and I wouldn't have been carried back to my brother at the Yamaha in the living room of the new house on Flax Pond where my parents fought their final battles. And I wouldn't have felt the joy his playing added to that household, taking the edge off yelling and stretches of coolness that could not be attributed to the breezes off the pond. And I wouldn't have recalled the piano lessons he took with Mrs. Rogers in Bridgehampton, or my teenage case of whooping cough, or the trips to Carvel, or climbing the sacks of grain at the GLF, or the beauty of potato fields before what my mother called design statements began appearing among the raised rows. Because Van Cliburn died, I can return to the last days by the pond that was the center of a universe that featured 5 kids, their parents, and an assortment of pets, plus Geneva and Freddie and a few others who stuck with us through the wine and scotch. Which is not to say I'm pleased with the death of the great pianist who wowed the Russians, or that his dying somehow offered an occasion for consolation and forgiving. Only that because he happened to die the other morning, I was able to regain some forgotten family history that I wish to forget, but also dearly wish to remember. My brother at the piano, playing and playing. And in honor of spring, this next to last poem I wanted to read. I read this at the Southwest Harbor Library last week and dedicated it to Hannah Shaw, the daughter of some friends of ours who was in my daughter Emily's class at MDI High School, who died tragically a couple of weeks ago, and I'd like to dedicate it to her again. It's the kind of thing that happens where sort of everything that you go through after the fact sort of is sort of through the lens of that death. This is called Zones of Peeper. Driving home from a party, parsing conversations, car windows down to greet first real summer heat, we pass through zones of peeper. Not song, not chorus, though scientists no doubt find pattern in the high-pitched whatever it is. Nor peep, which reminds you of silly chicks falling over each other in an incubator. Every moist venue between Pretty Marsh and Soamesville, every 100 yards brings this antic singing, somewhat alien in tone, magical too, like fireflies, but auditory, not synthesized, but a perfect cacophony of the higher ranges, tiny frogs doing their spring thing, flinging music into dank milieu of pond edge and marsh, inspiring a certain joy in our recap of the evening, as if every fault could be forgiven when you consider the rest of the world, wild and wet and flipping out. I haven't heard those peepers yet this year, but I'm hoping they'll be around pretty soon. Actually, 2 more poems. This first one might be fitting in light of our celebration of Earth Day today. It's kind of a dark but hopeful consideration of the fate of the planet, if I actually have it. It might be the fate of this poetry reading. Yeah, skip it. It was called The End of the World. You didn't really want to hear that anyway. So let me finish up with a brand new poem. Its subject, trees, brings to mind my first visit to 105 Eden Street. And I think this must have been around 1990, as I moved here in 1989. And I started working at the college in 1993. But I came over to meet Ann Kozak to see if I could get a job as a writing teacher. And I didn't get the job, but I did get to sit in on a lunchtime discussion with some faculty members about the rights of trees. I thought that was so cool. I was reminded of that encounter while reading the last collection of poems by Russell Libby, the longtime director of the Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, who died last year. He was a very fine poet. He wrote about the land with great affection and close observation. And I have been reading, and actually I've just reviewed this, his last collection, What You Should Know, a field guide to Three Sisters Farm, published by Blackberry Books last year. And I was particularly struck by his poems about trees, and I just wanted to read a short one by him as an example. This is called Permanence. Tonight I marked 16 sugar maples with year and circumference, 4 nearly large enough to tap, 12 to encourage upwards by thinning. The permanent ink is supposed to last, but so too was Francis Gordon's farm, and 2 of the largest trees grow from his cellar hole. I hope to taste syrup of the sap of these trees, tumbled in stones, caution against permanent plans. I recommend it. It's a wonderful book. So inspired by those poems, I wrote a remembrance of a stand of pepperidge trees that formed this kind of glade near the pond of my childhood in Watermill, New York. And I'm going to end with this poem. I did want to note that on this day of Wikipedia, there were some details about pepperidge trees that I didn't know, so I went looking for more information. And after I'd written the poem, I discovered that the Latin name for the pepperidge tree, which is also sour gum and tupelo tree, same tree, same family, is Nyssa sylvatica. And Nyssa refers to the Greek water nymph, and sylvatica, the sylvan place, is the woodland habitat. And you'll see at the end of the poem that it adds a kind of a nice resonance or connection to what I ended up describing. Reading Russell Libby's poems about trees gets me thinking of the gathering of pepperidge by Flax Pond, where I went as a boy to be by myself and listen to the family in the distance and wonder at the wild lilies of the valley that created a carpet at the foot of the trees, which twisted to the sky and cast irregular shadows. I love the name Pepperidge, and that I knew the name. I also knew maple, ailanthus, and the tree's father planted, northern spy with its verboten apples, his beloved shaggy cryptomeria. But the Pepperidge stood apart, forming a kind of retreat, a natural space, even if a narrow path had been cut through catbrier and spindly trees removed on the way to the perfect pond. I like to think those Pepperidge still stand, holding their corner of the land, impervious to bittersweet, wild grape, and other stranglers. Somehow elegant, raising Pepperidge limbs to the same sky I once worshipped, so blue and dry on late June days, voices in the distance vanishing, rubbing my hands against the alligator bark as if the Pepperidge could produce a genie, which they did, a breeze off the pond that brought goosebumps to my skin. Thank you. So I'm glad to hear that Edge of Eden is still going. Terrific.
Yeah.
I could take questions or not. You could also get on your way to dinner. Thanks, John. We're good.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
So, I ask this of all poets I know,
Uh-oh.
eventually. It's your turn. happens when you decide that something is going to become a poem. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I mentioned that I'm not prolific, and I don't sit down to write things, and so that's what I was trying to get at it, that my sort of pressure of being out on Great Spruce Head Island for a week and sort of feeling like I had to, produce, come on, you're out here, they're taking care of your meals, let's do something. But that's generally not the way I don't know what else, I don't really know what I would really do in a residency, unlike that one, but it's usually something that kind of provokes me and maybe even sets off a sort of a little line of associations. And it could be something that I've seen a lot, like the poem about the dry cleaners. I love to watch the clothes go by. I could sit there all day just watching these striped shirts and stuff. It's to me it's a wonderful thing, and so I had been obsessing on that, and so I finally said, well, I've got to write about this, and I had been writing about Ellsworth, so that kind of thing. The Pepperidge Tree really did come from reading Russell Libby's poems about trees. He has wonderful poems about ash and some of the trees on his property. And that's what it was. It was his property. He was talking about his property. So I was thinking, so I sort of set off this association of when I was little, we had this wonderful house and pond in Watermill on the South Fork of Long Island. And how I loved this one particular spot. It really was a retreat for me from everything that was going on in the house. And in particular, and then the fact that I loved the fact that I knew what kind of trees they were. It's sort of that kind of like, I know what pepperidge are, and maybe not everybody knows that or something like that. But I also love the word pepperidge, and so that just sort of tumbled out almost verbatim like that. And it also sort of led to other memories. I mentioned I didn't explain, but the Northern Spy, the reference to Northern Spy, my father had planted a Northern Spy apple tree at the one corner of the garden. And for some reason, we were just not to touch those apples. I distinctly remember years where they all fell and rotted. And there was some kind of, I don't know what it was, but they were verboten. You didn't mess with them. And as a little kid, you might go over there and, I don't know, hit him with a bat or something. And I guess I just remember that being a distinct memory. So it's sort of an accumulation of things, and then one thing triggering something else. And I really feel like with that Van Cliburn poem and then the Pepperidge Tree poem that I'm sort of in a childhood zone there now, that I could see maybe doing 2 or 3 other things, not intentionally maybe, but looking for something else from that period of my life that will spark something else, because it's very rich. I mean, it's 50 years ago now. So I can kind of make it up and draw on the things that I remember. And I have written about that time before, about the snapping turtles and in the pond and things like that. But it still seems to me like a rich place to go.
Thank you.
So, yeah, cool. Great. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming.